Chair and councillors. I'm joined this evening by colleagues James Cox, who's the Development Manager for the project, Francis Wright, who has been working with Still Green Co-housing, and Mike Bodkin, who's our Head of Planning. I'm Neil Murphy. I'm one of two founding directors of Town. We've been involved with this site and this project for many years in one guise or another, and I think it's fair to say that, with a few exceptions, it's wonderful to see that there are very few unfamiliar faces on the screen, because we've spent a lot of time in Wolverton. We've done a lot of talking to people, and I think that even though I know that views will differ on what we've put forward, in a sense, hopefully there's nothing new under the sun now on this project. We've talked a lot about the issues, and although we'll disagree, I very much hope that the ground is fairly well covered. And to those of you who we haven't interacted with before, I'm looking forward to doing so. And I hope you'll recognise the amount of work that's gone into this project, not just from us, but from many people across the town over many years. I'm going to kick off. If you just flick onto the next slide, Mandy, please. Just with a little bit of an overview of we're going to kick off with a little bit of an overview of how the project came about, and then we're going to talk through the scheme proposals and then pick up some questions at the end. So just to give an overview of the planning context, I'm going to hand over to Mike Bodkin, our Head of Planning, just to give a very brief overview. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Neil. I mean, a lot of you will be, I'm conscious that many of you will be very familiar with some of this, but the planning policy context for the redevelopment of the Agora is well established at a number of different levels. That's right from the national level with the National Planning Policy Guidance and the National Planning Policy Framework and the Planning Policy Guidance, which focusing on optimising brownfield redevelopment, on the concentration of development into town centres, and the promotion of mixed-use development in sustainable, accessible locations. Then at the borough-wide level, Plan MK has an allocation for the site for 140 dwellings, which is actually a bit higher than you'll go on to hear that we're proposing. And it also contains, Plan MK also contains ambitious local policies around sustainability, sustainable transport and design, which intended to be brought forward borough-wide. Now, at the local level, the Wolverton Neighbourhood Plan and the redevelopment of the Agora, as many of you will know, is actually the catalyst for the development of the Neighbourhood Plan, and policy W1 is right at the heart of it, which talks about how the Agora needs to knit back in the Victorian street pattern and to replace the heart of the town centre that was lost when the Agora was developed. And it also, policy W1 also contains 21 separate objectives, and we'll walk you through every single one of those objectives this evening. No, we won't. We'll just demonstrate in generality how we meet the provisions of policy W1, I can assure you. And there are also many, there's the Agora development brief, which was produced a few years before the neighbourhood plan and actually formed the basis for some of the technical characteristics of policy W1 and other aspects of the neighbourhood plan. And there are also many other thematic and specific area-wide policies which apply to the Agora, and all of these we've taken into consideration in developing our proposals for the scheme and in working with the many community and local stakeholders in over recent years. And with that, I'll pass over to James. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Next slide, please, Mandy. Thank you. So when we first think about developing a site, it's really important to have a look at the opportunities and constraints that arise from that. The Agora site, as you know, is the town centre site in the centre of Wolverton. It's brownfield, and it provides the opportunity to reconnect Church Street to the north with the square to the south, which are the two key commercial areas in the town. It's located in a conservation area, and it's got nearby listed buildings, including the churches on the eastern end. With that comes the attractive and existing potential views towards the St George's Church. There's mature trees along that boundary and across the site as well, some of which are worthy of retention. There's the square itself, which provides amenity space within the town centre, the existing pedestrian routes through the site, which are well used, the need to retain and provide access to the garages and properties on Buckingham Street, the bus stop on Church Street, which is, as we found out during consultation, is the 4th busiest in Milton Keynes. There's utilities present on site, which we've had to consider. And as well, there's the opportunity to make the most of this kind of long earmarked redevelopment site in the centre of Wolverton, which, as Mike pointed out, as well as the council's decision to support the development through looking at the works to Church Street and St George's Way car park as well. Next slide, please. As a part of the work as well, we've undertaken a lot of public and stakeholder engagement, particularly the project website, which has kind of come alive over the past month or so, and which we've kept up to date throughout. We've worked with the Agora Regeneration Stakeholder Group, which has been chaired by Councillor Middleton, had membership by council officers as well as local business owners and other stakeholders. The group were a great help in influencing how the development has come forward, particularly some of the methodology around the car parking survey, how we undertook our public review and stakeholder review, influencing the demolition application, and they had a direct influence on providing more circulation space around the bus stop on Church Street, supporting the proposed one-way system along Church Street as well, ensuring views to St George's Church, and as well as supporting the council's decision for the wider public realm works as well. In addition to that, we undertook our stakeholder workshop where we had 57 attendees. Attendees had to use wooden blocks. I'm sure some of you will remember to think about the layout of the site, viability, and consider the trade-offs of those two. We had an incredible public review where we had over 300 attendees who filled out 200 response forms over 3 days at King's Church. Overall, the response was incredibly positive, huge support for the redevelopment of the Agora, and a lot of people supporting the layout and character and the mix of uses, as well as landscaping that we've proposed within the scheme. There were a few kind of more qualitative comments around the loss of the Agora car park and the parking levels, which we'll come on to. And we think we've provided alternatives around that. There were a few other comments about the proposed scheme at the time being Wolverton enough and needing to have stronger Victorian queues, which we took on board. And as well, there were questions about the viability of the amount of retail we were proposing them, which again, we've taken on board as well. In addition to that, we've undertaken engagement with block builders and primary school kids on Minecraft, which looked really fun. We had the Agora Go-Go programme in the summer and autumn of 2019. We've been working with Still Green co-housing, which Francis will talk to a bit more. And more recently, we've started with offset projects on a young person-led space within the scheme. Next slide. Thank you.
Okay, back to me. Thank you. So you'll be familiar with the site. It hasn't come out brilliantly on here, but we're working within 2 lines on the site. The blue line is the land that we own or control. So we own the Agora Centre through a vehicle called Love Wolverton Limited, and we have an agreement with the council to acquire the car park on planning. But we've actually gone slightly outside the boundary to design the scheme, looking at improving the pavements and parking and bus stop areas on either side of the site, which will need Milton Keynes Council's agreement to do, but those proposals have gone forward. Next slide, please. So this shows you the layout and some of the key streets. So the project is laid out in 6 blocks. Radcliffe Street is reinstated. You can see Church Street to the north and Buckingham Street to the south. We imaginatively refer to the blocks as blocks A to F. as well as reinstating Radcliffe Street, there is a Muse Street, which basically follows the line of the old backway that used to run through the site. That ensures continuity of access as now to the rear of the houses on Buckingham Street. It also provides circulation through the development for people coming through in their cars, access to quite a bit of parking, emergency vehicle access, and so forth. Radcliffe Street we propose to be one way, so new Radcliffe Street one way heading south, and the Muse Street one way heading from west to east. So effectively, it provides an anti-clockwise circulation through the site. There's also a substantial amount of additional car parking within Block A, making use of the fact that the agora involved a lot of excavation. So we have a natural kind of semi-basement there. The cut at the end, as it's called, a slightly wider street, was a direct response to feedback from stakeholders wanting to conserve the views from Church Street to the church and make a direct connection with Hovis Lane, which that does. You can also see the two little streets that are proposed. Those are car-free pedestrian streets with the same dimensions in terms of building line to building line as streets like Oxford Street and Bedford Street. And they very much are intended to echo the character of the little streets that were Wolverton's original first streets, long demolished under what is now the Glyn Square Retail Park. Next one, please. Here you can see the whole development in what's called an axonometric view, so a sort of angled aerial view. And what this should convey to you is the scale and massing of the proposal. Broadly speaking, it's 2 to 3 stories along street edges where most of the buildings are houses. And then on the corners, it sometimes goes up, it's still predominantly 3 stories, but sometimes goes up to 4 stories on key corners. And most of the corners have small retail units underneath. You can also see here the proposal that most of the blocks are open to the south and provide shared courtyard gardens for residents of the blocks to use, which will catch the sun. You can also see here the central block, Block C, as referred to in the previous picture. That is where Still Green co-housing will be located. Next slide, please. So in terms of the uses of the development, there's 115 new homes planned for everything from 1-bed flats to 4-bed houses. It's really important to have a good mix to maintain a good demographic mix within the town. The allocation of 140 homes on the site by Milton Keynes Council could really only be achieved with essentially entirely small apartments, which is not really what Wolverton needs or wants, and isn't really what the council's housing policies seek either. These are generous homes. They're 7% bigger on average than national space standards, which themselves are actually larger than most private developments still deliver. All homes have private and or semi-private outside space, and most have both. As I mentioned, there'll be 8 new high street retail units on corners, so they'll help to activate the streets and corners and reinforce Wolverton's independent retail culture. So these will not be chains, they're not sized for chains, they're very much sized to encourage independent SMEs. And as James alluded to, there's going to be a new community space that will be handed over for free under a Section 106 agreement, and we're doing some work with local organisations and offset projects to put together a business plan for that as a space for young people. Again, reflecting the very strong feedback that young people in Wolverton need somewhere to go that isn't McDonald's. Next slide, please. So there are basically 2 sort of broad tenures of housing within the projects. There are homes for rent. 86 new homes for rent, including 31% affordable housing, which is the level that Milton Keynes Council's policies ask for. The buildings, the landscape and the parking will be professionally managed and leased. There'll be no additional service charges to tenants, apart from lease costs on their parking spaces. Everyone will get free broadband, and because they are built to very high thermal performance standards, they'll have very low running costs. The other key part of the project is Still Green Co-housing, and I'm going to hand over to Francis to talk briefly about that.
Thank you, Neil. Still Green Co-housing Group, and there are quite a few of the members of the group with us on this call, has been seeking to establish a co-housing community for people aged 50 and over in the area for many years, and we're delighted to be supporting them. Co-housing is a way of living in a more neighbourly way. Everyone has their own home, but also share facilities and collectively manage their community. So the co-housing block will have 29 self-contained apartments, of which 4 will be for social rent. The shared facilities in the common house will include a kitchen, lounge, dining area, a laundry and a guest bedroom overlooking the shared courtyard garden. The community will be renting 15 parking spaces and managing their own parking and visitor parking needs using car sharing to do so. I live in co-housing, so I'm somewhat biased, but I'm really confident that the community will be a real asset to Wolverton. And with that, next slide, please, and I'm handing back to James.
Thank you, Francis. One of the most kind of valuable things in the scheme is how it's learned from Wolverton. It's not only done that through the built form, but also the architecture. It's done this in a kind of non-pastiche way, as the scheme is being delivered now in the 21st century, but it's definitely a continuation of the Victorian design and will contribute to the wider streetscape in the town. That will be done through a series of high quality materials which are befitting of the conservation area, including classical proportions in the windows and drain pipes which provide the frontages. Red brick elevations are seen around the town, glazed brick and stone courses, paired front doors, as you can see there, another common feature. Lintels and archways, as well as different porch and window details, which all kind of tie the elevations together. Overall, feel that there's a variety within a pattern within the new streets, but they clearly belong to Wolverton. And if you go on to the next slide, you'll see how the images there show the similarities between what we're proposing as well as what was on the previous slide. Next slide, please. Another key element is the landscape and public realm that we're proposing. There's going to be huge benefits to the town centre environment, most notably the reinstating of Radcliffe Street, which was lost under the agora 40 years ago. There'll be improvements to the southern side of Church Street, including a new bus stop and layovers, additional town centre parking and wider pavements. We're proposing 2 new car-free little streets, like Neil's mentioned earlier. These little streets will provide a space for children and neighbours to socialise, as well as existing residents who will become a public right of way. The new street will provide rear access and parking, including to the rear of those properties on Buckingham Street. The new pocket park includes the retained trees on Buckingham Street as well. And overall, there'll be a very sensitive material palette which will match the existing materials in Wolverton, been heavily influenced by the local context. Public art is something that we've kind of been working away on. We're going to be retaining the Brian Jarvis Agora sign and placing that on the southern facade in Block E, fronting onto the square. We'll also be looking to outline the perimeter of the Agora within the paving. So you'll be able to see this on Radcliffe Street, the Mews Street, as well as in the Undercroft in Block A. And then, as Neil's already mentioned, there'll be communal courtyard gardens for residents, which will provide them with kind of interactions with nature and encourage neighbourliness. Next slide, please. Ecology and trees have been another influence on the scheme. There'll be 3 of the high and medium value London plane trees will be retained within the pocket park. We'll be protecting the root and crown areas of the high quality trees in the churchyard, which provide an excellent backdrop to the site, as well as the town centre. We're providing 75 new trees as well as shrubs and herbs planted across the site, and these have been chosen to deliver a net biodiversity enhancement. Unfortunately, we will be losing 60 trees as a result of the development, but many of these are low value and unsuitable. And we'll also be providing new swift boxes and bee nesting bricks for further biodiversity enhancement. Next slide, please. A huge driver of the site has been sustainability, and particularly the climate emergency. The council have declared a climate emergency and have set out their aspirations to be the greenest city of in the world. They've done this within their new sustainability strategy, which has influenced the project. Plan MK has similarly ambitious planning policies, and both of these provide a really important context and guidance for our planning application. In the UK, buildings and transport account for over half of the UK's carbon emissions, so it's really important that we change the way that we build and move, which will be vital in combating the climate emergency. To this end, the development will deliver an 80% reduction in CO2 over current building regulations and a 70% reduction on the requirements of Plan MK. This will be achieved through a fabric-first approach, where buildings will be highly efficient and well insulated, as Neil said, making them cheap to run. We'll be providing an on-site community microgrid in partnership with Wolverton Community Energy, and the development will make the most of existing new and active travel choices in the town. Thank you. As I said, active transport is essential in reducing carbon dioxide emissions and providing improved health outcomes. Wolverton is already a very walkable neighbourhood. It's a true 15-minute neighbourhood with access to many services, amenities and transport options on the doorstep. The new shops and amenities will add to that range and choice. There's a very good existing bus and rail services, and we'll be offering further alternatives as well, including a new bus stop and arrangements on Church Street, which we've spoken about with Arriva, and they're really pleased to see coming. We're going to add 2 new bike hire schemes to Wolverton, including the extension of the Santander Next Bike scheme already in Milton Keynes, and a Brompton bike dock, and 2 new EV car clubs, which will all be accessible for local people, making the development a natural place for people to live if they don't want to rely on a car. Next slide. We're very aware that car parking has been a concern and still is a concern for people within the town. The planning application has been submitted and is supported by a wealth of extensive data and evidence to show that the proposals are providing an appropriate level of car parking. This slide shows car ownership data from the census for Wolverton in particular. The first column shows the census data for all car parking ownerships households in Wolverton. It shows 25% have no car or van and 46% have only 1 car or van, making the average ownership 1.09 cars per household. This reduces among rental households. So 42% in that case have no car or van, which is much higher than previous. 44% only have 1 car or van, and only 14% have 2 or more cars or vans. And you can see on the far side what we're proposing. So across the 115 households in the development, 24% will have no car or van, which is in line with Wolverton and the renters. And then 76% will have 1 car or van, which is an over provision for Wolverton as a whole and renters in Wolverton as well. Next slide. Thank you. Parking is about more than private vehicles as well, though. We're providing 167 secure residence cycle spaces and 20 new town centre parking spaces as well, in line with the Milton Keynes' planning policy. There'll be 88 residence spaces which will be leased for a monthly charge with discounts for electric vehicles and affordable housing residents, and this will be enforced through tenancy agreements. There'll be 16 new town centre spaces provided on Church Street and Buckingham Street, and we'll be providing 100% passive electric vehicle charging provision and 8 active EV charging points, which will be delivered at the start. This approach has been recommended to us by the supplier we're talking to, as it ensures that when we do deliver the EV charging points, they'll be the most up to date at the time and will respond to the demand of residents. And then lastly, Milton Keynes Council are exploring the new kind of works around St George's Way, and I'm sure Councillor Middleton and Ed can touch on that later. Next slide. So to delivery and phasing, we submitted our planning application just before Christmas. We're hoping to be a planning committee in most likely late March or early April. If that's successful, we'll be looking to demolish the agora in spring, summer this year, with construction starting after that and completing in the second quarter of 2023.
Thank you, James. Well, a scheme such as this doesn't just have environmental and social benefits. It also has considerable wide-ranging economic benefits. And we asked consultants Litchfield to do some work for us, analysing the short-term and construction benefits, and also the longer-term economic benefits once it's in existence. So through the construction phase, we anticipate more than £50 million worth of economic output into the local area, over 300 jobs in construction, and nearly 500 in the wider supply chain, and a total of over £750,000 in new homes bonus flowing through to the council as a result of our development. In the longer term, more than £600,000 invested in that kind of first spend of home, settling into a homemaking, if you like. Every year, residents will spend more than £2 million in the local shops and economy, equivalent to over about 26 full-time equivalent workers, and the new retail jobs themselves in the new retail areas will bring nearly 50 jobs, as well as a further more than 20 in the supply chain. And as a whole, we anticipate a gross value added of more than £2.3 million into the local economy as a result of our development. Thank you. Next slide, please. And I'm passing to Neil.
Thanks, Mike. So really, just to finish, I mean, Francis is going to sum up the benefits for us, but I just wanted to highlight, I mean, all of you in Wolverton live with the agora for heaven knows how long. It's had its good times and its bad times, and obviously it's been empty for best part of 2 years now. But these couple of images just show you kind of in before and after terms what's going and what's coming, and we think the images speak for themselves. This is the square. The square really is going to become the focal place of Wolverton again, a really lively place. The next slide, please. This is the view past the Queen Vic, south down Radcliffe Street. Real sense here, I think, that that the grid is coming back, and that severance that has really split the town centre in half for 40 years is going to come to an end, and an inviting new street that connects those two vital parts of Wolverton's economy back together. Next one, please. And then finally, and this is really drawing on our experience. I mean, the little streets of Wolverton are wonderful, but as some of you know, our first built project, it's a co-housing project in Cambridge called Marmalade Lane, which it's won a lot of awards, and one of the reasons for that is that it's based around this car-free street called Marmalade Lane that has just been a revelation in terms of the ability of children to play, of neighbours to come out and socialise with clean air, and no risk to their safety. And that's really what we hope to achieve with the little streets in Wolverton. So trying to keep cars out of our streets is not just about coping with parking and things like that. It's actually about trying to do what probably is the most Victorian thing we could do, which is get back to the idea of streets as the place where people live their lives and where society lives, which is something I think that we could all do with in this rather intolerant day and age. We're nearly done, and we can get on to questions, but one last slide. Francis, can you just sum it up for us?
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for listening. I do have the pleasure of summing up now. So this is a long-awaited regeneration project that's highly compliant with local and national policy, It will provide 115 much needed new homes and 9 commercial units with a mix of tenures ranging from market and affordable rent through in the co-housing community to market sale and social rent. And it will make a significant contribution to the local economy. As Neil has shown images, the master plan knits into the historic fabric of Wolverton's town city centre with a contemporary but respectful design by award-winning architects. And in this central, well-connected location, the scheme has sufficient car parking provision and will be one of the most sustainable projects in the UK. It's a well-supported scheme that's evolved through thorough and genuine engagement and accords with Wolverton's development plan and with the council's strategic objectives, and we hope it will have your support. And with that, we come to questions, and we're missing our slide on that, so I'll just pass back to Neil for the questions.
Neil?
Yeah, so Mandy kindly sent over some questions that had been received, I think, by sort of around lunchtime today, which we did put on a slide. I've got them in front of me, so I can kind of read them out. And I'm sure that there have been others received subsequently. So perhaps Mandy can sort of fire those across at us, and then I don't know whether you want to open it up. Well, I don't know what the policy is, whether you allow general questions in this forum or whether they need to be pre-registered or.
You read your slide and then I'll take over.
Okay, fine. Look, well, in that case, so I mean, I had about 10 questions noted down. So the first was somebody had asked, and I'm sorry I haven't got names to questions. I hope that's okay. Whether the kind of black steel elements on the building at the head of the square might be a bit incongruous. I think that what we've tried to do with the architecture is to recognise that that, you know, great places are not just endless serried rows of red brick streets, and that isn't what Wolverton is. There are, of course, that's the dominant form, but there are outbreaks of real difference. And I think that, you know, the inclusion of things like arches and materials, we won't use iron in this day and age because it's very high carbon, but steel as or metal as a substitute, another metal as a substitute. You know, they're not things you'll find in the average Wolverton street, but they are things you'll find in some of the old railway buildings. And so I think that what we're trying to do is to accept that in any group of streets there are sort of higher order and lower order buildings, and really give the square something with some presence. I mean, we're not trying to pretend it's the Campo in Siena, but I think that, you know, it really is an important civic space, and it's not felt that way because the Agora has turned its back on it. So really, and I think we have with that building tried to make it, it's less sort of bulky than it was. I think that people felt when we did the public review that it was too, it was a bit kind of bulky and bumptious, and so we've reduced the scale of it a bit, and the architects have really refined the elevation and materials to try to give it presence, but without being kind of overbearing. I mean, we think we've got it right, but, you know, architecture is to an extent a matter of taste. So it is, you know, there will be others who feel that we haven't. I think what's really helpful here is that the council has a brilliant conservation officer who will be crawling all over this and no doubt putting us straight if he feels we've overreached. So that's probably what I'd say about that. There was a question about not providing parking for new commercial units, and as well as the sort of general issue of under provision, and a couple of questions about parking at Tesco. I mean, I think one of the things I would say about this, there's quite a lot of misapprehension about the status of the Agora car park. The Agora car park has never had its restrictions enforced, but it is limited to 2 hours, and we're not supposed to allow overnight parking. Now successive owners have not enforced that. But it's not actually right to sort of think that the restrictions on the Agora car park are actually less in theory than in any other. We do appreciate that, you know, that you are limited at Tesco and at other large car parks. But again, I think that, you know, the aim of shoppers car parks is to be for shoppers, and that's what the Agora car park was very clearly put there for. We can argue about whether our survey is, you know, right or not, but in the end, you know, we have to produce data and use that data. and the methodology was approved by the council and by the working group. And in the end, it doesn't say there are never any problems at any time. What it basically says is that removing the Agora car park won't lead to kind of parking Armageddon and shortages. And I think that in that context, we're providing additional retail spaces, partly driven by the new residents coming in. Best part of 300 new residents, who many of whom want to shop locally. But also, I think that we're sort of, first of all, we're taking 4,000 square meters of space out of the town by knocking down the Agora. And I think that what we're saying is that this sort of model of every shop needing its own parking space is not really appropriate for towns with traditional high streets. And I think that in the general level of flow, what our data shows is that the town works. Now, I know a lot of people disagree with that, and I think that's partly why the council is looking at potential provision on St George's Way, and I'm sure that Robert Aird can say something about that later. The next question, I'll make these shorter answers. How confident are you that the retail space will be let? What flexibility of use is there? We're pretty confident. We've had a lot of inquiries. We are very confident of getting a new small supermarket that will be quite valuable to replace the co-op in there. We've had plenty of inquiries about restaurants, tap rooms, etc. Of course, during the pandemic, it's different, but in the end, we are trusting that by the time that we are building and letting these units, hopefully the pandemic will be under control and we'll be back to some semblance of normality. I mean, the reality is that much of Wolverton doesn't have these kind of modern units that modern retailers need. And to be honest, some of the inquiries we're getting are from existing Wolverton businesses who would like better premises than the ones they've got. So we are pretty confident, but there is a provision that, in the end, we have thought about whether there could be other uses, were there issues, and certainly these units would work as health centre spaces or dentists or other kinds of uses like that if need be. There was a comment about loads of planning documents, meaning that lots of people won't have much of an idea what's going on. I mean, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't on this, because in the end, the planning system requires a lot of detail, and if we'd skimped on it, plenty of people would be the first to tell us. We understand that the planning portal, the local authority planning portal, isn't that simple to use. We've tried to put the key information on our website. We are going to be issuing a short visual aid in terms of basically a kind of 5-minute film just explaining the project for people who are busy and don't have time to go ploughing through lots of planning documents. But unfortunately, we can't help the requirement for masses and masses of detail. And I'm sure, as I say, that had we not produced a 100-odd page transport assessment, people would be quite rightly telling us that we hadn't done our work properly. So it is a pain, but we are going to do our best to try to help people navigate that. What's the provision for disabled parking and visitors? James, would you answer this, please? Because I think this is one that you've been quite close to.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the we kind of originally planned to include more disabled parking from the outset, but during conversations with the council's highway team, they suggested that the best approach was to kind of wait until residents get in and then allocate spaces nearby to their dwellings. So we were we've gone with that approach as advised by them.
Thank you. There was a question about whether there's outside storage for apartments and family cycle storage spaces. So the answer is that family houses will have their own cycle stores in their rear gardens, and those will be sized to make sure that you can get several. You can get enough bikes in there for the bedrooms in the house. The apartments don't have outside sort of general storage, but again, as I said, we are in almost all cases exceeding national space standards, and they include quite generous provision for storage. So I'm well aware that new build housing is often associated with a lack of storage, but those are in a sense from the bad old days, and we hold ourselves to higher standards. So we will make sure there's a good level of storage in all units. What's the impact on current Buckingham Street residents? And I think this was with regard to accessing the back of their properties. They won't go the same way they do now, but the stretch of the old back lane behind the homes on Buckingham Street next to the Agora is adopted land. So although we will hopefully be integrating it with some new paving and new planting into the scheme, that will remain adopted land, and we will be obliged to provide unfettered access to it at all times, which will now be from Radcliffe Street and then turning left into the Mew Street rather than coming across the car park. But the short answer is there will be no impact or no negative impact. There was a question about access for bin lorries and emergency services. So we are not planning to bring bin lorries into the site. We can actually service the entire scheme using communal bin stores, which is what we prefer because it leads to a lot less wheelie bin clutter within the drag distances required. So we don't need to engineer the streets to allow giant bin lorries to turn around, and that in turn makes them much more friendly for pedestrians and cyclists. The emergency services will be able to access all parts of the development. Yes, a fire engine, if it has to get down one of the little streets, will have to drive across the nice landscaping, but that's fine and that's allowed on the basis that you don't expect fires every day. It's not like bin trucks coming once a week and chewing up your flower bed. So, all of that's been done. It's been tracked by our engineers, and it stacks up. There was a question about density and whether the scheme is overdeveloped. I mean, I think the key point here is that we are actually undershooting the amount of housing that the site is allocated for. And the reason we're doing that is that we're trying to provide a development that's going to have an appeal to a wide range of people, including families, not just people wanting small flats. It's about 2/3 flats, 1/3 houses, but that includes some generous 3 and 4 bed houses. And in the end, as we've said, I think from the outset, the costs of developing this site are astronomical. We will be £4 or £5 million down before a single thing appears out of the ground, with the costs of the land, of remediation, of removing the asbestos from the Agora, of demolition, of service diversions, of planning costs, and all the rest of it. In a world in which the public sector can't just step in and subsidise things left, right, and centre anymore, like it maybe could have done in previous eras. We have to make the scheme viable, and that requires a certain level of development. We don't think it is overdeveloped anyway. We think that the sort of 2-3, mainly 3, and some 4-storey pattern really fits in well with Wolverton. We don't think it's had to be sort of crammed in at all. But again, that's to some extent a matter of taste. The last question that I had was, somebody had asked, how will tenants who store extra cars on the surrounding public streets be penalised? Which is a very fair question. So in essence, what it will provide is that what their tenancy agreements will provide is that they are not allowed to store not only on public streets but in spaces that are not their allocated spaces. That is fairly commonplace in build-to-rent schemes, for example, in London. And the answer is that we will take advice on the appropriate sequence. It won't be you get evicted at the first offence, but the ultimate sanction for tenants who repeatedly breach their covenants, whether it's on this or on antisocial behaviour or on looking after their property or whatever, is eviction. We are very clear that there have to be the legal mechanisms to secure what we're promising. We're already in discussions with the council about making sure that those are there. Mandy, those are all the questions I had. Did you have some more?
I had some very late ones come through. In actual fact, it's from Jenny, who's actually in the meeting. So I don't know if the chair's happy for Jenny to ask the questions, or if you want me to read them out.
Jenny, over to you.
Yeah, okay. I appreciate all the time and effort that has gone into the development. I really do. And how you're looking to make it a success. I understand that the development will be aimed at individuals or families who will use public transport to meet their travel needs. So as such, is it fair to say the success of the development relies on that usage?
Up to a point. I mean, I think that the answer is that we're, 3/4 of dwellings here can have a car parking space if they want. Only one, but as you've seen, I think that caters for most people. And every dwelling with 2 or more double bedrooms, which would include all family houses, will have a parking space. So, although we hope to avoid it, it's perfectly possible that that all of the family housing here could be taken by people who rely on their cars. We don't think that will be the case, but it might be. And what we expect is a kind of blend of forms of alternatives. So, I mean, the first stage in sustainable travel is reducing the need to travel. So making sure people don't have to get in their cars for basic things like a pint of milk, which of course in Wolverton they don't, because it's a compact place with lots of amenities. The second thing is making sure that very short journeys can be done conveniently by foot and by bike, which again in Wolverton is generally reasonably straightforward. And of course, Milton Keynes is blessed with an incredibly good cycle network that's the envy of most places. Certainly, as somebody who cycles pretty much everywhere, when I come to Milton Keynes, I've found it a revelation. And then of course public transport where the distances are longer, or the weather's bad or whatever it might be. But of course nobody's expecting that to completely eliminate the requirement for car journeys. So we are expecting some people to own cars, and we are expecting people to use a car club. And like I say, it's not about absolutely everybody revolutionising their behaviour. It's about gradual staged behaviour change. And of course, we completely understand that some people just won't find this suitable for them. Luckily, they're incredibly well catered for by the 99% of suburban developments that go on elsewhere, which have got parking spaces up the yaya. So, I mean, I think that we're, as ever, you pay your money and you take your choice. But I think we're on reasonably strong ground here in thinking that there'll be pretty broad appeal to families and smaller households.
Okay. So based on that, what journeys on public transport have you or your team actually undertaken from Wolverton?
Well, I don't think we've had the pleasure of meeting before, Jenny, but I think there'll be others in the community who'll verify that we are train and bike people. So I have got a bus a few times in Milton Keynes, but generally our mode of travel is we arrive by train and we cycle everywhere. And generally we try to stack up meetings to mean that we can arrive at Wolverton or Milton Keynes Central and then cycle between the two for different meetings. For what it's worth personally, I have a family of 5. We have 1 car and we use public transport for everything else. So I think I've driven to Wolverton once for 30 meetings, and that was in December about the COVID testing centre when we were being told not to use trains. So, I mean, I think we're not hypocrites. We practice what we preach, and I think that partly for that reason we're pretty confident that there are lots of other people who will be prepared to live in similar ways.
I've arrived on the bus from both Bletchley and Milton Keynes, central Milton Keynes stations, as well as using the railway station. So yeah, we do know about public transport in Wolverton.
Okay.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Neil.